She ruled over an empire that covered a quarter of the world, but her dinner table might be the biggest surprise of all. Queen Victoria's diet was a fascinating mix of discipline, indulgence, and downright strange habits that tell us more about her than any royal biography ever could. Today we're uncovering the hidden world of royal meals, the breakfast routines, the midnight snacks, and the dining rules that shocked even her guests. Ready to find out what Britain's most famous monarch really ate? Breakfast. The scrambled egg obsession. Queen Victoria's breakfast table would have impressed any modern brunch enthusiast. Kitchen records from the 1870s show that breakfast typically included at least 8 different hot dishes laid out on silver warmers. Victoria had a particular fondness for scrambled eggs, but these were no ordinary scrambled eggs. Royal chefs prepared them with cream and butter until they reached a consistency described in records as cloud-like. The Queen insisted they be served immediately after cooking, which meant kitchen staff had to time everything precisely to avoid her displeasure. Beyond the eggs, breakfast offerings included kidneys, bacon, sausages, kedgeree, a Victorian rice and fish dish with Indian origins, cold meats, and various breads. Kitchen accounts from 1887 note that breakfast preparations began at 5 a.m. to ensure everything was ready when Victoria descended at 9 a.m. sharp. The interesting part is the speed at which she ate. Court memoirs from her ladies-in-waiting describe breakfast as a rushed affair, but we'll come back to this later. Luncheon. Light but lavish. Luncheon at Victoria's court occupied a curious middle ground between informal and elaborate. Meals were typically served at 2 p.m. and consisted of around 6 courses, though they were smaller portions than dinner. The Queen preferred cold meats, game pies, and salads for luncheon. Kitchen inventories from Windsor Castle show regular orders for cooked chickens, tongue, and various terrines. These were arranged on sideboards, and guests could serve themselves, one of the few informal aspects of royal dining. Victoria particularly enjoyed potted meats, which were essentially Victorian pâtés sealed with butter. Recipe books preserved at the Royal Archives include detailed instructions for potted tongue, potted shrimp, and potted game, each with specific spice combinations the Queen favoured. Fresh fruit appeared at every luncheon, regardless of season. This required considerable expense and effort in Victorian times. Royal accounts show regular payments to specialty greengrocers who supplied grapes, peaches, and melons year-round, often grown in heated glass houses. A single out-of-season pineapple could cost the equivalent of several weeks' wages for a servant, but Victoria expected exotic fruits to be available daily. One peculiar luncheon habit involved timing again. Like breakfast, luncheon moved at Victoria's pace. Court diaries mention that she would often eat while standing or walking through rooms, making luncheon an even faster affair than breakfast. This left visiting dignitaries scrambling to eat while maintaining royal protocol. Afternoon tea, a sacred ritual. Afternoon tea was perhaps the most predictable meal in Victoria's day. Served precisely at 5 p.m., it followed a rigid format that staff could execute with their eyes closed. The Queen took her tea with milk and a small amount of sugar. Her tea was Earl Grey, served at a precise temperature. Kitchen staff used a thermometer to ensure it was exactly right. Too hot, and she would wait. Too cold, and it would be sent back. The food accompanying tea was surprisingly restrained compared to other meals. Thin sandwiches. Cucumber was a favorite, along with scones, small cakes, and occasionally muffins. Kitchen accounts show weekly orders for specific teas and consistent quantities of flour, butter, and preserves for baking. What made afternoon tea significant was its social function. This was when Victoria conducted informal audiences, received family, and discussed palace business. Court correspondence shows that being invited to afternoon tea indicated favour, while being excluded suggested displeasure. Victoria had strong opinions about tea etiquette. She insisted on proper pouring technique. Tea first, then milk. Multiple accounts from court observers note that she would visibly react if someone poured milk first, considering it improper. One German princess visiting the court wrote home describing how terrified she was of making a mistake during tea service. Dinner, the main event. Dinner at Victoria's court was an orchestrated production that could last several hours. Served at 8:30 p.m., it consisted of anywhere from 8 to 12 courses, depending on whether there were guests. The sheer scale of food preparation was remarkable. Kitchen records from a typical dinner in 1895 show that chefs prepared multiple options for each course, ensuring variety, even though only a fraction would be eaten. A single dinner might include 3 soup choices, 4 fish preparations, 6 meat dishes, and multiple desserts. Victoria's personal preferences shaped these menus considerably. She loved roast beef and insisted it appear regularly, prepared precisely to her liking. Well done, contrary to the rare beef preferred by many at court. Kitchen staff maintained detailed notes about her preferences, recording that she favored brown gravy over wine-based sauces and preferred vegetables cooked until very soft. Game featured heavily when in season. Pheasant, partridge, venison, and grouse all appeared on royal menus. Kitchen accounts show the royal estate at Balmoral supplied hundreds of birds annually. These were often prepared simply, roasted with basic seasonings, reflecting Victoria's preference for straightforward cooking rather than elaborate French preparations. One surprising element was the presence of Indian-influenced dishes. After Victoria became Empress of India in 1876, curries and other Indian preparations appeared regularly at dinner. Menus from the 1880s list mulligatawny soup, various curries, and dal as standard offerings. The Queen employed Indian servants who advised the kitchen on authentic preparations. The dining room itself operated under strict rules. Conversations were directed by Victoria. You spoke when she addressed you, and about topics she chose. Multiple courtiers' diaries describe the anxiety of royal dinners, where making interesting conversation on demand was required while eating complex foods with perfect etiquette. The speed problem. Here's where royal dining became genuinely difficult for guests. Victoria ate quickly, and when she finished a course, that course was over for everyone. Court memoirs are filled with complaints about leaving dinner hungry. The Queen would typically finish each course in just a few minutes, and footmen immediately removed all plates, whether guests had finished or not. One visiting ambassador's diary entry describes watching his untouched fish course disappear while he was mid-conversation with his neighbor. This created a strategic challenge. Experienced courtiers learned to eat quickly without appearing to rush, taking bites whenever the Queen did. New visitors often left their first royal dinner having barely eaten anything. Princess Marie-Louise wrote in her memoirs about leaving her first dinner at Windsor Castle, absolutely starving, after managing only a few bites across 12 courses. The problem intensified as Victoria aged. In her later years, she ate even faster than in her youth. Kitchen records indicate that entire 12-course dinners sometimes concluded in under 40 minutes. For comparison, formal dinners at other European courts typically lasted 2 to 3 hours. Palace staff dealt with this by preparing food in easily consumed portions and ensuring that everything could be eaten quickly if necessary. Tough meats were avoided, vegetables were cut small, and soups were served at temperatures that allowed immediate consumption. The kitchen essentially designed menus around the Queen's eating speed. Desserts and sweets, the Queen's weakness. If Victoria had a culinary weakness, it was sweets. Kitchen accounts show remarkable quantities of sugar, chocolate, and candied fruits ordered weekly. Her favorite dessert was chocolate sponge cake, which she requested so frequently that chefs developed a standardized recipe. The royal archives preserve this recipe, noting that it should be moist, dark, and rich with chocolate. Kitchen accounts show regular orders for the finest chocolate available, imported from specific suppliers in London. Ice cream appeared at nearly every dinner, regardless of season. Victorian ice cream required considerable labor to produce, involving ice harvested in winter and stored in ice houses, then used with salt to create the freezing temperatures needed. Windsor's ice houses could store up to 40 tons of ice, dedicated largely to ice cream production. Victoria particularly enjoyed fruit-based desserts. Strawberries, raspberries, and peaches appeared fresh in season and preserved the rest of the year. Kitchen inventories list dozens of jars of preserved fruits, stored in dedicated pantries. One steward's account book from 1883 records purchasing over 200 pounds of strawberries in a single week during June. Perhaps most surprising was her love of something quite simple: plain sponge cake with jam. Despite access to the most elaborate desserts Victorian pastry chefs could create, she regularly requested this childhood favorite. Kitchen accounts show that raspberry jam was purchased in large quantities, specifically for this purpose. Drinks, wine, whiskey, and water. Victoria's drinking habits were more moderate than many assume. Wine consumption records show relatively modest quantities compared to other royal households of the era. She preferred wine diluted with water, typically mixing claret with water at a ratio of about half and half. This was common practice in Victorian times, though Victoria maintained the habit more strictly than most. Royal cellars contained extensive wine collections, but consumption records show she personally drank sparingly. Whiskey appeared later in her life, particularly at Balmoral. She developed a fondness for Scotch whiskey mixed with water, considering it medicinal. Correspondence with her doctor includes letters discussing whether whiskey was beneficial for her health. He apparently encouraged it, and she continued the practice into old age. Champagne was reserved for special occasions. Accounts show champagne purchases increasing during celebrations, state visits, and holidays, but it appeared rarely at ordinary dinners. Victoria preferred still wines for regular consumption. Interestingly, the Queen drank relatively little tea outside of afternoon tea, despite tea being ubiquitous in Victorian Britain. Breakfast usually included coffee, prepared strong and served hot. Kitchen records note specific coffee suppliers in London, with beans ground fresh daily in the kitchens. The German influence. Victoria's German heritage significantly influenced her eating habits. Born to a German mother and married to German Prince Albert, she maintained German food traditions throughout her life. Sauerkraut appeared regularly on royal menus, unusual for British tables of the era. Kitchen records list regular orders for barrels of prepared sauerkraut from specific German suppliers. Court observers noted that this remained a fixture even after Albert's death in 1861, when Victoria abandoned many other practices. German sausages and cured meats were breakfast staples. Kitchen accounts show orders for specific German varieties that were either imported or made by staff following German recipes. Victoria's breakfast table included Leberwurst, Bratwurst, and other preparations that British courtiers found exotic. Christmas traditions at court were heavily German, including the foods served. Victoria popularized the Christmas tree in Britain, and German Christmas foods came along with it. Menus from Christmas week show Stollen, Lebkuchen, and marzipan treats alongside traditional British Christmas fare. The Queen's insistence on maintaining these German foods, despite considerable anti-German sentiment in Britain during various political tensions, shows how strongly she valued these connections. Even during periods when German culture was unpopular, menus continued featuring German dishes. The Scottish Retreat. Balmoral Castle in Scotland offered Victoria a different culinary experience than Windsor or Buckingham Palace. She spent several months annually at Balmoral and developed distinct Scottish food preferences. Porridge appeared at breakfast throughout her stays in Scotland. Records indicate this was prepared in the traditional Scottish manner, with water and salt, no sugar or cream. This represented a departure from the elaborate English breakfasts served at her other residences. Scottish game and fish dominated Balmoral menus. Salmon from the River Dee, grouse from the estate's moors, and venison from the forests all featured prominently. Kitchen accounts show that these were prepared more simply than similar foods at Windsor, often just roasted or grilled rather than made into complex dishes. Victoria particularly enjoyed Scottish shortbread and oatcakes. Kitchen records include recipes for both, with notes indicating the Queen's preferences for specific textures and levels of sweetness. She would send these back to England as gifts, considering them superior to English biscuits. The informality of Balmoral extended to dining arrangements. Meals were somewhat less formal than at Windsor, though still far more elaborate than typical homes. Court diaries describe outdoor lunches during fine weather, with food prepared in the castle kitchens and transported to picnic locations on the estate. State banquets. Dining as theatre. State banquets represented the pinnacle of royal dining, where meals became political theatre designed to impress foreign dignitaries and demonstrate British power. These events served vastly more food than anyone could eat. Records from an 1897 state banquet list over 400 individual dishes prepared for approximately 150 guests. This abundance was intentional, displaying wealth and capability through excess. The menu planning alone required weeks of work. Correspondence shows that menus were submitted to the Queen for approval, often revised multiple times. She paid attention to dietary restrictions of foreign guests, ensuring appropriate options were available. When hosting Russian dignitaries during Lent, additional fish courses were prepared to accommodate Orthodox fasting practices. Each course followed precise choreography. Footmen served guests simultaneously, requiring extensive rehearsal. Staff documents include detailed timing charts showing exactly when each course should be served, how long guests should have to eat, and when to clear plates. The food itself emphasized British excellence. Roast beef featured prominently, symbolizing British tradition. Game from royal estates demonstrated the bounty of the realm. Exotic fruits showed access to the empire's resources. Kitchen accounts from these events show purchases of the finest ingredients available, regardless of cost. Foreign visitors' accounts of these banquets express amazement at the scale and precision. One French diplomat's memoir describes a state banquet as a military operation executed with food instead of soldiers. The goal was clearly achieved. These meals left lasting impressions of British power and sophistication. Personal quirks and preferences. Victoria's personal eating habits included several quirks that staff learned to accommodate. She strongly disliked waste. Despite the abundance served at royal meals, leftover food was distributed systematically. Servants received leftover meats and bread, local charities received certain items, and some foods were repurposed in staff meals. One steward's diary describes the Queen inspecting kitchens and expressing displeasure at wasted food. Temperature was crucial. Foods had to arrive at precisely the right temperature. Kitchens installed specialized equipment to keep foods hot during the long journey from kitchen to dining room. Cold foods similarly required careful timing to prevent wilting or warming. She had strong opinions about presentation. Multiple chefs' memoirs mention her insistence that foods look appetizing. Garnishes should be fresh, colors should contrast pleasingly, and nothing should appear sloppy. Dishes were returned to the kitchen if presentation failed to meet standards. Repetition bothered her less than variety. Despite having access to enormous menu options, she frequently requested the same dishes. Menus from different years show remarkable consistency in core offerings. This actually simplified kitchen operations, as staff became expert at preparing her favorite dishes. One peculiar habit involved salt. Victoria preferred food well seasoned and would add extra salt at the table. This was unusual for the era, when heavily salted food was associated with lower-class eating. Kitchen records include notes reminding chefs to season her portions more heavily than others. The widowhood years. After Prince Albert's death in 1861, Victoria's eating habits changed noticeably. Records show a shift toward simpler, more modest meals. Dinner courses reduced from 12 to 8 or 9. Kitchen accounts show decreased spending on exotic ingredients and imported delicacies. This reflected both her mourning and a genuine shift in preferences. Court diaries from this period describe dinner as more somber affairs, shorter in duration and less elaborate in preparation. Comfort foods appeared more frequently. The dishes she had enjoyed with Albert, German preparations, simple roasts, familiar desserts, became staples. Menus show increased repetition, with the same dishes appearing weekly rather than rotating through wider variety. She ate alone more often. Rather than hosting large dinners nightly, Victoria frequently dined in her private rooms, with just a lady-in-waiting for company. Kitchen records show separate, smaller meal preparations for these private dinners, distinct from the formal dining room meals served to courtiers. However, state obligations continued. When hosting official functions, the full elaborate meal service remained. The striking contrast between simple private dinners and lavish public banquets shows how Victoria separated personal preference from royal duty. Interestingly, her appetite remained robust. Despite the reduced formality, portion size and the speed of eating remained consistent. Staff continued dealing with her rapid eating pace, and guests still left dinners hungry if they were invited to private meals. The kitchen operation. Behind Victoria's meals was a massive kitchen operation that ran with military precision. Palace employment records show that Windsor Castle's kitchens employed over 45 people during Victoria's reign. The kitchen hierarchy was strict. The head chef, always male and often French, oversaw multiple sous chefs, each responsible for specific aspects of meal preparation. Below them were specialized cooks for roasting, sauce-making, pastry, and vegetable preparation. Kitchen accounts include detailed job descriptions and wage records for each position. Food procurement required its own staff. Palace records show regular purchases from dozens of suppliers across London and beyond. Meat came from specific butchers who held royal warrants. Fish arrived daily from suppliers in coastal towns. Vegetables came from royal gardens when possible, supplemented by commercial suppliers. Storage facilities were extensive. Windsor Castle contained multiple pantries, each climate-controlled for specific foods. Ice houses stored ice for preservation and dessert making. Wine cellars held thousands of bottles. Dry goods pantries stored flour, sugar, and other staples in quantities that would supply a small village. The daily schedule began at 4 a.m., when kitchen staff started fires in the massive cooking ranges. Bread baking came first, followed by breakfast preparation. Throughout the day, different teams prepared different meals, with carefully coordinated timing to ensure everything arrived at the correct temperature. Waste management was organized systematically. Food scraps went to pig farms that supplied pork to the palace, creating a circular economy. Bones went to soup stock or were sold to glue manufacturers. Even vegetable peelings were composted for the palace gardens. Account books show that virtually nothing was simply thrown away. So what did Queen Victoria really eat? Her diet balanced luxury with surprising restraint. She had access to every delicacy the empire could offer, yet her tastes leaned toward comfort and simplicity. Good ingredients, familiar flavors, and straightforward cooking. Her famously quick meals set the pace for everyone around her, shaping how royal dining was planned and served. Even in the palace, her personal habits became protocol. German traditions, Scottish influences, and ingredients from across the empire all found their way to her table, reflecting Victorian Britain itself, diverse, ambitious, and deeply traditional at the same time. What surprised you most about her dining habits? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this royal deep dive, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of how people really lived in history. Thanks for watching.